everyone. Welcome to Market Systems Development 101, an introduction to MSD and why it matters in refugee response. My name is Carrie Diener, and I'm the Executive Director of the Refugee Self-Reliance Initiative. Many of us have heard of market systems development or markets in crisis through our work, and we're really looking forward to taking a deep dive into these concepts today and to discuss how they can be used to drive systems change in refugee response efforts. Here at the RSRI, we see market systems development as a crucial component of refugee self-reliance. And this recognition has driven our decision to be more deliberate about how to utilize this approach, both in terms of sharing resources with our network, but also in terms of creating space for joint work through a variety of activities, including learning events and co-creation of technical resources that will be supported by our newly formed MSD task team. I'm so excited to introduce today's presenter, Sasha Munch, who's leading the RSRI MSD task team. Sasha has more than 25 years of experience in guiding and implementing market development programming in fragile settings all over the world, and most recently with Mercy Corps in a variety of roles, including as the Senior Director for Markets, Economic Recovery and Growth, and as the Country Director in the Middle East region. She is a leader in sector-wide learning and coordination efforts on the Humanitarian Development Peace Nexus, cash transfer programming, humanitarian coordination, market systems development, and financial inclusion. And Sasha is also one of the founding members of the Markets in Crisis Community of Practice and was the previous board chair of the SEED network. Sasha, over to you.
Thank you very much, Carrie, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everybody. And welcome to this hopefully the first session of a series of conversations and events around market systems development and how it relates to refugees and forcibly displaced populations. Thank you, many of you who provided really interesting questions in the registration for this session. And I just want to clarify, this is an introduction course, right? We're going to start with the basic language and getting everyone on the same page. We have 60 minutes for this, so we can't get into very many details about how you actually implement MSD. And some of you provided really deep, interesting questions in the registration. Hopefully, there will be opportunities to have future webinars or focused discussions that get into some of these questions. So if you don't feel like this session answers all your questions, that's okay. We'll hopefully come back to it, and I look forward to more of your participation later. This is also quite a large group, so we have shifted the technology a bit, and there's not going to be a chance for you to just speak out directly, but please put questions in the Q&A, any comments in the chat, and we've got several opportunities for you to engage, so please participate in some of the technology enabled participation. And to start with that, I would like to ask you a question, which is when you hear the words markets and systems, what are all the words that you think about? What comes to mind when you hear markets or systems? And Abby is going to put up a slide to show you how to respond to that using Menti. Abby, over to you. Okay, so please, everybody, click on, either use the QR code with your phone or go to www.menti.com and type in the code 12623502. And please tell me all the words you can think of when you hear markets and systems. What do you hear? And we'll get on. Here we go. We're going to see the results in live time. So hopefully you guys have great ideas. For me personally, if I hear the word markets, I always think of food because I love food. But that's a very specific market, isn't it? Ooh, these are good. Sustainability, supply and demand. We've got lots of demand. Yep, labor. We've got, ooh, legislation. That's a good one. I like that. Incentives. That's great. Rules is a really good one. These are some great thoughts. Integration. I like integration. Production and supply chain. Ooh, self-reliance. Yes. Hopefully, self-reliance through markets. Money. Yep. Money makes the world go round. The donut. Ooh, we're going to get into the donut in a minute. Complexity. Yes. Complexity is a really important aspect of systems, isn't it? Formal. That's a very interesting one. Power. Yep. Power is in there, isn't it? Some people have power, some people don't have power. Okay, we are going to keep going forward on this session, but if you think of more words, please keep putting them in, because what we will do after this session, when we send you the slides and resources and things, we'll send you a screenshot of this final word cloud. So I am now going to share my screen, hopefully. Give me a second. Yes, so hopefully everybody can see my screen and still hear me. So as has already been said, welcome to the webinar, the introductory webinar on MSD for refugees and other forcibly displaced populations. So we've just done a bunch of words on what do markets and systems work mean for you. Let's talk through some of the definitions. Not surprisingly, there are a lot of different definitions for market. But what we use, even within this industry, but a definition I like that we use a lot is basically saying a market is, it's an exchange, right? There is a demand and a supply, and it could be goods or services, but somebody has something they want to get rid of, and somebody has something they want to take. Very importantly, in the way we use this, a market is not a marketplace. The marketplace is the physical space, like a traditional market, or like Amazon, right? Amazon is a marketplace where an exchange could take place, while the market is that exchange, that buying and selling, which could be something tangible like food, but it could be a service like healthcare. So if that's a market, what's a market system? A market system is this whole network of all of the things that surround that simple exchange that make that exchange possible. And so if you think about something simple, like somebody selling vegetables in a market, in a traditional market, the market system includes the fertilizer and inputs that went to the farmer, and then the farmer who grew the carrot, and then the person who harvested it, and then the transport that brought it to the market, and then the woman selling it, and the person buying it, and maybe the place where the person buying it got the money. It's all of the things around that simple exchange. And so it's very complex, as people pointed out in the word cloud. But it's much easier, I think, to explain graphically. And this is what the very famous market system donut, which explains in a picture form what a market system is. And at the center is this basic supply and demand, right? Somebody has something they want to get rid of, somebody has something they want to take. At the top of half of this donut are all of the other things that have to happen to make that exchange work. So there probably needs to be information. You probably need infrastructure, roads, building. There might be other services. For example, small businesses maybe have accountants to help them with their bookkeeping. All of the different functions, the different actors, the many people who support that exchange. And at the bottom are the rules and norms that underlie that exchange, right? So, of course, there's laws governing most markets and different regulations and standards, but there's also informal norms, the things that we've all agreed on to make a market work. So, for example, in a traditional marketplace, how are people setting their prices? And all the vendors have agreed not to undermine each other too much so that the market still exists. That's an example of an informal, unwritten norm. So let's talk now, how would this apply to refugees? And let's walk through a market system that you might actually not just know, but many of you probably work on. So if we start at the core, we have refugees who want to work. And very commonly, we have the construction sector, which needs to hire people to do the work. This is a very common place where we try and work on helping refugees get decent jobs. So what are the supporting functions needed for this? Some examples. They may need information on where those jobs are, or transportation to get to those sites, right? Or maybe they have to buy equipment, tools, safety equipment, or they need additional skills. But also maybe the construction companies have all their supporting functions. So they need finance to finance the jobs. Then at the bottom, you have all of the rules and norms. And these are construction industry related rules, like safeguards to make sure people on the job are safe, or there's certification saying that plumbers and electricians have the skills to do their job. But there's also the bigger laws around refugees, right? Laws on whether refugees can work or not in that company. And then there's the informal, unwritten norms, like what are the attitudes of construction company employers to actually hiring refugees? Are they willing and interested in hiring refugees? So this looks quite simple, right? But as we know, market systems are much more complex than this, but you get an idea of the different elements of a market system and how you can map them out. So why do we care about market systems? Why does this matter to you and your jobs? This gets into what we call market systems development, or market systems programming, or market systems approaches. And what this is saying is, that we all live within market systems, right? Every single one of us, all of you, poor, displaced, everybody lives within market systems. But those systems are not equitable. Rich people have no problem accessing the systems, getting what they need. But the poor and marginalized can't get what they need from those systems. So if we want to make the poor and marginalized better off, we need to make the systems work better for them. And this application of systems thinking to the work we do started about 20 years ago with an organization called the Springfield Center. And when they first developed these theories, they called it M4P, or making markets work for the poor. And I actually like that terminology better because I think it's really clear what we're doing. We are making market systems work better for the poor. To give you a deeper explanation of what that actually means, we are going to show a very quick video. So Abby, can you present the video, please?
If you've heard of market systems development, you might be asking, what does it mean? What's business or private enterprise got to do with reducing poverty? And how does this compare with more conventional aid? Let's shed some light and start with an example. Take Petra, a smallholder farmer living in poverty in a hilly rural area. Her family relies on cash from raising animals and selling milk. To take advantage of growing markets for meat and dairy products in cities, Petra needed to increase production. But this carried several risks, one being livestock disease, which makes animals unproductive. Because veterinary companies saw no profit in providing services to rural areas, the nearest vet service was hours away. Along with other small farmers, the risk of disease discouraged Petra from investing her savings to boost her herd, and so they were excluded from the new food market opportunities. Conventionally, aid agencies and governments tried to help people like Petra directly. No vet services? Then let's vaccinate livestock. Or even, let's hand out cattle to replace any that die. The problem with such solutions is that, first, they inevitably only reach a few people, so they lack widespread impact. Second, the benefits end when the funding runs out, so they are unsustainable. Worse, some handouts may actually block entrepreneurs from creating businesses that could have provided affordable goods and services for years to come. Market systems development is different. Its practitioners see that even poor people routinely engage in markets to buy goods and services and to earn income. They also recognize that many markets fail to work effectively or fairly, but seek practical ways to make them work better. Agencies using a market systems approach look for the root causes of market failure, for barriers that disadvantage poor people or exclude them from economic opportunities. Then, with innovations and investment, they help businesses develop viable long-term solutions that can be scaled up. In Petra's case, lack of access to livestock health services was addressed in 3 ways: helping vet product manufacturers to understand the potential for rural sales, lobbying for reform of regulations that obstructed affordable services, and shared investments to test the viability of innovative rural pharmacies that then took affordable services into remote areas. This approach meant working with diverse actors besides farmers, such as manufacturers, traders, village-level pharmacists, vets, and government officials. Ultimately, this led to a more inclusive market system, with ongoing investment and innovation by businesses. As a result, tens of thousands of remote farming households, including Petra's, are now benefiting from viable local vet services at affordable prices. Petra's story is just one example of transforming market systems to realize the economic and human potential of people living in poverty. It exemplifies a development approach that can achieve both large-scale impact and lasting change. Instead of handouts, the approach pursues commercial and social benefits in tandem. By innovating, sharing financial risks, and building trust, it transforms how businesses, communities, and governments think and work together. Today, market systems approaches are being used in sectors such as agriculture, financial services, energy, health, and sanitation, so that markets work better for poor people.
Thank you, everybody. I hope that gave you a good sense of what market systems development is. And so, what actually is different about market systems development from a direct delivery? How do you actually think about this in a different way if you are managing a program? When we're doing a direct delivery approach, we think about what do people need? What are their problems? And then how can we solve these? And we try to fix a problem. With market systems development, we think, what needs do people have? But then why are the systems around them not already solving these problems? What is wrong with the systems? That means they're not fixing that. And then we think, how can we make those market systems work better? How can we facilitate change? How can we partner with all the actors that exist in that system long-term to make sustainable change? And the reason we do this, if this is done right, it works because what we're doing is we're focusing on those underlying causes of a problem, right? Not just the top symptoms, but what is actually underpinning that problem. So for example, to give you a very classic example, any of you who have worked on an agriculture program have probably seen this, that you go in and you see farmers are not using better seed. And you say, why are the farmers not using better seed? And after the analysis, you discover the farmers know about better seed. They would like to use it. They can even afford to buy it. But the actual problem is that the bags of seed sold by the local seed suppliers are 20-kilo bags. And these are smallholder farmers. They need a 5-kilo bag of seed. And so they don't buy seed because what's sold in the shops doesn't work for them. So this is a classic, very simple example of why you need to get down to the root cause of what's an obvious problem and change that. If we do that right, the solution is scalable, right? Lots of people can benefit from that solution, and it should last long after we're done with the program. And because we've changed the whole system, it's inclusive. Anyone in that system can benefit from this change. So this is why we care about MSD and why we want to use it in our programming. And it seems pretty sensible, right? And pretty easy. And you think, oh, this is a great idea. Of course, in practice, it's harder to implement. It takes a lot of work, which is why not everybody does it, but the rewards are worth it. And so let's think about this a little bit in terms of how you would implement an MSD program and the approaches you would take. And let's start with what we call the theory of change or the results chain. So let's say you want to get to poverty reduction for refugees, right? You want them to live better lives. Well, to get there, refugees need to be able to have access to higher paying, better jobs that last, right? And they need to be able to take those jobs. To get there, you have to do a bunch of activities that are going to help refugees access higher paying jobs. With a market systems framework, what we do is we first have to understand what is going on in that market system. And we do a lot of analysis to start this up, which you probably heard about things called market systems assessments. And there are different tools out there to do those. But you have to analyze what's happening in this market system. That means refugees are not accessing jobs. And then we have to change the system. We have to work at the systems level to help to make the system work better for the refugees. Conventional programs that just do direct delivery skip the step of understanding and working in the market system, and they just try and directly help refugees access jobs, which is great for those few refugees that access the job, but doesn't help everybody else who's outside the program. So can you quickly, we're just going to do this in the chat. We're not going to use all the technology for this, but can you tell me in the chat, what are oops, sorry, everybody. I just took us off. There we go. Nope, I'm going to quickly click down. There. Okay. Hi. Sorry, everyone. I am having trouble staying in. Okay, we'll just stick with this. So can you guys tell me what are some reasons looking at the system? So, and I know many of you have actually seen this. What are some reasons why market systems would not support refugees and IDPs getting good jobs? What are some of the things going on in the system that might keep people from accessing jobs? For example, I can think of an obvious one, maybe language. Maybe refugees have moved to a country where they don't speak the language, and if they can't speak the language, they can't get a job. So what are some other examples? Ooh, yes, lack of identification. This is a clear one, right? If you don't have a formal identification, you can't get a job. Discrimination. legal barriers, hostility from the host community. Yes, lots of things on the challenges from the host community. Limitations on permits. You need special permits to get jobs. What else beyond some of these legal issues? What are some other things? Very good. Yes. Distance, right? You need transportation. You can't get to the place where those jobs are, or no transportation system. The refugees aren't interested because they don't see themselves there for a long time. That's a very good point. Lack of information about jobs. Those are all really good. I can also, yes, I can think of other ones. Maybe there's lack of childcare, right? You're trying to help women get jobs, but they need somebody to take care of their children while they're there. And several people have pointed out another great one, which is an overall weak economy or lack of jobs in general. And this is a really great point, right? Because sometimes refugees have moved to a place where there are not enough jobs even for the local population. And so it's going to be very hard to get refugees jobs if locals can't get jobs, right? So in that case, what could you do? Maybe what you need to do is actually think of sectors of the economy that can grow, opportunities to help employers expand their business so they can hire more people, both locals and refugees. And maybe thinking creatively, you realize there's a whole big refugee influx in a place that brings opportunities, right? Those are people who need things, they need to buy things. And so actually there's opportunities for host community businesses and refugee businesses to serve that population and employ more people, both refugees and locals. So it's thinking about the whole system and the creative solutions within that. So I think this is quite clear, right, when we're talking about things like jobs or markets. It makes sense why we think of market systems. But it's very important to remember that we all live in markets in different ways, right? We live in markets as producers, as workers, but also as consumers and just as participants, right? And so market systems development applies to all sorts of different sectors. And it can be to improve people's economic opportunity or their food security. We can make goods cheaper or jobs available, but it can also apply to services like healthcare, right, is a market, or education is a market system. And so we can apply the same thinking to that. And it can even apply to the more ephemeral systems like peace building. And if we think of the classic example here of in a rural area, you have pastoralists, herders, and farmers who are having conflict over land use, that is a market system. And you can unpack that system and maybe think, oh, we need to support better mechanisms for communication. Maybe we need to improve the laws around land use. Maybe we need to support alternative forage sources for herders. But all of those are systems, and we can think about them using MSD, and we can apply systems change facilitation to find solutions. So we're going to go back now. We're going to try another word cloud on Menti, and I want you to tell me, as soon as Abby puts up the link, what are some of the sectors that you think are particularly relevant to refugees in your jobs when you're trying to support refugees and forcibly displaced? What are the sectors that you think you need to be working on to make their lives better? And let's see. Agriculture, yes. In rural areas, that's very important. Technology, yep. This is an increasingly important one for jobs. Tourism is an interesting one, yep. So, psychosocial support. This is a brilliant one. Yes, psychosocial support is a market, and finding sustainable ways to ensure people have access to that is incredibly important for people who have fled conflict, for example. Manufacturing, yes, that's a great source of jobs and services people need. Social services, that's another great market system. Upskilling, and that's a whole, if you think about upskilling, that's a complicated market system, right? Because that involves things like maybe vocational technical centers, but also other forms of training and linking to jobs and internships. Credentials recognition, yes, the issue of identification and transferring skill credentials, that's a whole important system. Public health is a great one. Shelter. Shelter is this huge market system that is so important to people. And actually, I will say the shelter cluster, I don't know, for some of you involved in shelter, know they've done a lot of work now around how to apply market systems approaches to shelter. So this is great. And thank you. Please keep putting in your mentees. Again, we will share this word cloud when it's done, but you've got some great examples here of the market systems that are particularly relevant for the forcibly displaced. And we're going to go back to my screen. So let me, so I think this is quite, this makes sense, right, in a stable situation. Refugees, IDPs have fled a place, they're in a stable situation. It's clear how you would apply market systems, right? Even in refugee camps. If you think about the refugee camps, there's all sorts of market systems in there. And in a stable situation, you can do all that deep analysis. You can think of a 3-year program to improve the system. It makes sense. But what happens in a crisis? What happens, let's, for example, the recent case of Sudan, right? Where all of a sudden one day, everyone woke up and there was a massive conflict and 2 million people had to flee. All those market systems get turned upside down, right? People suddenly have to move, infrastructure gets destroyed, services end, and all those informal norms that underpin society fall apart. So the systems are in chaos. But at the same time, we know the systems still exist, right? People still rely on those local systems. When people flee, most of them are not sitting there waiting for humanitarian agencies to help them move, right? They're getting on buses, they're using the transportation system, they're getting themselves out of there. And people after a natural disaster are using their local markets, their social connections, their support systems, much more than us, to cope. And so we know those local systems are still crucial to people's coping. And we know there's lots of opportunities in there, right? In any situation, some people do much better off because they can seize the opportunities from the system. Often those are rich people getting better, but the opportunities could be there for affected populations, for marginalized, to also take the opportunities from those changes in systems. And so we want to leverage that local capacity and help the markets function within these crises. So that brings us to a whole body of knowledge and a community we call markets and crises. And there's many people out there trying to apply market systems thinking to crisis contexts. How does this happen? The best way I can explain this is a simple diagram that Mercy Corps made about 5 years ago that basically explains, as we know, market systems still function in crisis. So the underlying theories of market systems development is still there. The principles of market still matter. but we know the tactics we use to support them and the interventions we do may change. And so the basic market systems we care about may change, right? You're no longer worrying about how to improve the sustainable supply of veterinary services. Maybe you're trying to make sure that people have access to food, affordable food, sustainably. So what this diagram shows us is the range of options and the continuum of how you respond using market-based approaches in crisis. So if you look at the bottom left, this is the immediate crisis, and people needs help. They need help just staying alive. They need shelter, they need food, they need water. And maybe you come in and you try and directly support those affected populations with basic needs. But you want to do it while supporting the market, right? And so that means the most common way to do that is giving out multi-purpose cash, because then people have the money to go to the market to buy what they need. So all those little market sellers can still earn an income. They can stay alive. You haven't destroyed the local market for food by handing out in-kind things. But while we're helping the affected population directly, we also want to make sure that local system for food is working, right? And so we want to look at that market system and say, okay, maybe do the traders that we count on, do they have the cash they need to buy the stock? Or do they need help getting cash? Do they have the infrastructure? Are the markets around them functional, or do we need to help rebuild the markets? How can we make sure that those marketplaces are existing so that people can go there to buy the food they need? And then over time, as you go up, we shift from helping people with basic coping to helping people increase their self-reliance and hopefully not need aid at all. And we may still do that directly with the directly affected population by thinking, what is keeping them from accessing these market systems? Maybe they need help creating businesses. Maybe they need help finding out where there are jobs, but how can we help them directly access the local markets? And then when we get to the upper right corner, how can we actually help the local systems so that they are supporting self-reliance? And that's getting into the beginning stages of MSD. And there's another way we look at this that is a bit more complicated, but is a deeper detail, and it's called the market-based programming framework. And it basically, if you look at this, this looks like a donut, doesn't it? But with a lot more detail, and you still have the supply and then demand. And at the center, you have people who are in crisis. And they flipped it, so at the bottom, you have all the supporting functions, the services and infrastructure, and at the top, you have all the rules and norms. But what this is showing is that immediately after a crisis, if you look at the center, maybe initially as you're helping people cope directly, you're using markets, right? You're doing cash distribution. If you're buying things, you're buying it locally. And then as you expand beyond that, you're supporting markets. You're helping markets restart. You're making sure vendors are functional. You're making sure the businesses can support these people. And then eventually you get to the market system change. And there's a good short explanation of this that we will share in the resources at the end that explains what this all means and some examples of what the MBP framework does. So this has been a very quick explanation of market systems development. We obviously, this does not give you detail on how to do it. There is a 2-week in-person course on how to do MSD. So obviously there's a lot more detail needed, but hopefully this has given you some understanding of the language and the theories and the process of what MSD is and how to apply it to in crisis. Luckily, there's a lot of resources out there you can access. First of all, I would like to encourage you, as I said, there's a whole community trying to apply market systems development to markets in crisis contexts. And if you type in mic.discourse.group, you can join the Markets and Crisis Community of Practice. And it's an informal group where there are access to webinars and information, and you can ask any question you want. So please join that. Also, Beam Exchange, which is at beamexchange.org, has all the resources you could ever need on market systems development, guidance, explanations, glossaries, and they also do a lot of webinars. They have one upcoming on youth employment, I think. And there's a bunch of other resources. What we will do, don't worry about all of these. We will share this slide and all of those resources to all of you after the session. But what I would like to do is take a few minutes to answer your questions, to have a bit of a discussion. So please, if you have questions, put them into Q&A. And while we're talking about the questions you have, I have some questions for you. And so please put into the chat, tell me by number. First of all, what excites you about MSD? What do you think is good about this approach and applying it? Also, what challenges do you see using it for refugees and displaced populations? What makes it particularly hard? Because I will tell you that applying MSD to refugees and displaced populations is the next frontier, right? We've been pushing how you apply markets in crisis. Now, using it for a very specific, particularly vulnerable population takes it to the next level. And finally, what other MSD topics do you want to learn about through more webinars, or maybe we have focused discussions? What is your next round of questions that need a deeper discussion? So, but first of all, let us look at the Q&A. So first question, what are the authorities that that could any INGOs have to invest that's not so Abir, I'm not sure I totally understand your question. What are the authorities that could any INGOs have to invest that's much in market system and also could have a valid change and impact? Do you mean what power do I have? Can you reframe that question a little bit? But I will go to your next question, which is about how could we monitor and evaluate such practices? This is a really good point, because monitoring and evaluation for MSD is a whole massive thing, because obviously it's hard when you are facilitating systems. It's hard to tell what you've done, right, and what influence you've had versus what other, what's just happened naturally in the system. And so there is actually a whole group of very smart people that have been working on this for a long time. And if you go on the Beam Exchange, there's a lot of resources. It was something created by something called the DCED, the Donor Committee for Enterprise Development. There's a lot of tools on how you monitor and attribute the change you see. And if you like monitoring and evaluation, this is a whole deep world you can get very excited about. When is MSD not appropriate? Is it something people should do all the time? This is a great question, because I think what this gets to is the point of principles versus how you respond, right? What we are saying, the principles of market systems change are always valid because market systems exist everywhere. We exist in market systems. But how you facilitate those market systems and how you intervene may change depending on what you're trying to achieve and what the context around you is. And so you may decide, right, when people are dying, you're going to help them live, right? And that might be, you may decide, okay, in this case, we're going to do some direct delivery. But you're always thinking, okay, what's the next step? How do I get to sustainability? How do I get to scale? How do I help the system as soon as possible? So it's a question not so much of whether MSD is appropriate, but when and what is the most appropriate response in the moment. And then what we say with market systems development is you have to adapt. You're always stopping and saying, is this still the right approach? Do we change? Has the concept changed? You keep analyzing the information because market systems change all the time and thinking, okay, how do we get better? How do we progress? How do we get to greater scale and greater sustainability? Livelihood. So next great question, where does livelihood feasibility come into play in a market-based approach? This is really important, right? Because number one, there are always going to be some people that need social welfare, need support. We know this is especially true with refugees and displaced populations. And so we need to understand that population and support them and find systems-based approaches to make those welfare systems work better. But then when you're looking at livelihoods, and the interesting thing about refugees and displaced populations is you're not looking at a function, right? Sometimes when we're doing regular development, we look at livestock, or we look at youth employment, and we're looking at a whole sector. Here you're saying we care about refugees within a sector. Then you have to do an extra level of analysis of this issue of livelihood feasibility. What kind of jobs can people get? And that's skills and legal issues. And so it's adding in an extra layer of analysis. And this is something that the MSD working group in RSRI has started talking about, is do we need to add extra layers of analysis? Do we need to create new tools to do the extra analysis necessary to apply MSD to refugees? And that is a big topic of conversation that we need to keep having and that we would love you to engage in. Okay, sorry. So coming back to the original question on what authority do we need? This is actually a very good question, because the clarification was what government approvals do we need? And this has actually turned out to be a major hidden part of market system development, because obviously many governments don't necessarily understand what market systems development is and why. And almost all of us, when we're working in countries, we need approvals from some levels of government to do our job. And when you go in first and say, okay, we're not going to give things away to poor people, we are going to help private businesses serve poor people better, many government authorities say, that doesn't sound like a good approach. It sounds like exploitation. Why are you helping the private sector? And so often we need to educate government entities on why market systems development is good and how it will actually help the systems long term and help them do their jobs. There's been a lot of success about it, and you look at many countries over time, and you have government that's very enthusiastic and supportive, but you do often have to build into your program in the beginning more government education. And there are some tools out there and simple training on educating government entities on why this matters. It's vital, and it can pay off in the long run, because then you get them to be supportive, right? And eventually you get to the point that a lot of market systems development has to involve government change, law change, regulations. And we've seen incredible success once the government buys in, with them actually changing the rules. And so, for example, one classic example in Ethiopia, mobile banking was illegal for a long time. But to get financial services to remote rural areas in an affordable way, they needed mobile banking. And over time, the government was persuaded this was good, and they passed regulation, and then mobile banking was allowed. And now that has had a huge impact on Ethiopia. Question, what staff capabilities do you need for MSD? This is another crucial thing, and this is one of the biggest challenges, frankly, in MSD is, yes, you need staff. Staff need to be trained how to think and analyze and be creative, right? And you can't just give staff a 2-day training and say, go out and do exactly what you were told, because a lot of this is analyzing the situation, adapting, talking to people, working with the private sector. These are not skills that necessarily everyone comes to the job having. And so it takes training in what MSD means and why. And then what it takes is actually, even more than skills, really good management, because what we talk about is having adaptive management, where you meet with teams, whatever is maybe at your little local office, and then at maybe the regional level, and maybe at the national level or the program level, you meet very regularly, weekly, monthly, quarterly, to stop and say, how is our implementation going? Is this the right approach? What challenges are we seeing? Do we need to do some more analysis? Everyone on the team is responsible for understanding the context. And then you say, do we need to shift the approach? It can be more challenging to start, and it can be hard for teams. But what I've found is once teams get into it, it's so much more rewarding, because everyone is part of a problem, a part of solving a problem. And you're not just doing what you've been told, but you are part of the thinking. And so what we find is people who get into MSD love it and stay. And now if you look at the leaders of MSD around the world, many of them started 10 years ago as a field officer in northern Uganda or in northeast Nigeria, and they have just grown and developed because it's a really fun approach once you get into it. Oh my goodness, so many good questions. I'm going to take another couple and then we will close out. But a really good question: do you see a difference in an MSD intervention in a place like Ukraine, an active war zone in a country that has established markets, versus a country like Somalia that has an ongoing internal conflicts and markets? So let me think about the answer to this. Yes. Again, this comes back to a bit about theory and principles versus interventions, right? So even in Ukraine, that's an active war zone, there are market systems. And there's people, need food. There's food coming in, there's transportation, there's still rent for housing, people are still doing jobs. But obviously the situation is very fluid, and the way you can intervene is different. You can't think about 2-year solutions, can you? And you have to think about not doing any harm. So obviously we're not going to help farmers plant crops if we're not clear that they can still harvest those crops in 6 months, or maybe they're going to get hit by a bomb when they're out in the field, right? So you need to think about what's appropriate and how can you help people cope without doing harm. Somalia is an incredibly complex place, right? It's been on a long-term internal conflict. There's instability, but there's also more patterns and known factors. And there's actually some incredibly successful MSD approaches in Somalia. And there's a great test going on now by IRC, working with vendors to figure out participatory approaches to market systems development. So bringing the vendors in to ask them, how would they like the market system to change for them to support people? And I think the thing with Somalia, that's a longer term setting. It's unstable, but like I said, the patterns are clear. It's been going on longer. And so then maybe we can apply more quote unquote normal MSD, or at least over a longer period. I'm not sure if that's a really deep question, actually. And I think I gave you a short answer, but I think this is something we need to come back to. This could be a great topic of a follow-up, maybe brainstorming discussion with people who are testing it, is let's think about these different approaches and what different case studies are out there. And I know several people have asked for case studies on how to do this in different places. So these are great examples. What is the difference between a project program which is designed as a normal one and one designed as a market systems approach? I think there's always a fine line which could change the whole methodology we designed in the beginning. This is true, yes. And frankly, sometimes you look at a program and you can't tell if it's direct delivery or market system. I think the key thing is going back to what I talked about is the analysis, and that's results chain. So when you look at a full market systems development results chain, and I can put out a slide with a detailed one, they're really complicated and they have maybe 10 or 15 layers. And you start at the top with what is the systems change you want to see. And then it gets down to each level. Okay, if we want that change, what needs to change? And if we want that change, what needs to change? And we keep going down to the bottom. What are the activities we're going to do to get there? And that's created using this deep analysis. So many long-term MSD programs start with what we call an inception phase. And they may take up to 6 months to do all the market analysis and create that theory of change. When you get to the actual activities, it may be hard to see on the ground what's different, but if you ask any staff person, why are you doing this? They should be able to connect that specific activity all the way up to change to the market systems change. And that's the key difference. Next question, in a refugee intervention scenario, how best can you implement MSD and when do you measure impact? That's a good question, and it ties into the last one. MSD requires a long-term project while the donors in emergencies fund only for a short period. Do you have a study to implement MSD in emergencies? So yes, and educating donors is a whole other piece on this, right? Because we need them to support this, and there's some donors that are very supportive. Yes, there are good cases on implementing MSD in emergencies, and we actually need more. So I will give you some, but I think this is another case study we should develop. And the trick here is if you're doing it in a refugee context, in an active conflict context, you're probably measuring impact much shorter and maybe not so much at the big systems change level, but maybe, you know, I talked about the intermediate levels of impact, maybe there, and maybe you're assessing, okay, what's the early bits of systems change and how are we going to keep stepping up? And maybe you've got a 12-month plan. Maybe you can only get money for 6 months, 12 months. So you've got a first set of activities, but you've mapped out what you would like to do over 3 years. And then you get another 6 to 12 months of money and another 12 months. And it's multiple projects, but you have the vision in your head of where it is getting to in the long run. That was very quick. And I'm sorry, those are all really deep questions. I think those are things we'll come back to in other topics. I know we're almost at the hour. I don't want to take any more of your time. You all have other things, and I want to let Carrie close. So we're going to end the questions now, but thank you, and we will come back to all of those great questions in other formats. Thank you very much. Over to you, Carrie.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Sasha, for leading such an informative and really engaging webinar. And thanks to everyone who joined us today to learn more about all of these important ways that market systems can also help support refugee self-reliance. I'm really excited to see how we can dig into this in other ways and to have some follow-on discussions, including through some of the ideas that were raised today. Before we conclude, I want to also extend an invitation to all of you to join the RSRI's Community of Practice. This is a network of professionals engaged in supporting refugee self-reliance through programming, research, and also policy engagement. Our members meet bi-monthly for COP calls to hear updates from the RSRI and other partners. And we also invite COP members to special events like this on a variety of topics. We are also sponsoring a number of sub-working groups focused on very specific topics ranging from research to utilization of the Self-Reliance Index tool. And we invite you to join us. You can sign up for the Community of Practice by going to refugeeselfreliance.org/COP. And we'll put the link in the chat as well. Thank you again for joining us today, and we hope to see you next time.